You have come here seeking light, but it is only by entering the shadows that the truth reveals itself. The modern soul is afflicted not by too little feeling, but by an excess of it, and I must tell you plainly, as I have told many who sat across from me in the quiet hours of analysis, when you feel everything, when the world pierces you at every angle with its cries and its sorrows, you may think this is empathy. You may imagine this is love. But there is a danger here. To feel everything indiscriminately is to open the gates of the psyche too wide. And when the floodwaters pour in, your fragile identity, carefully formed through childhood and youth, can be shattered beyond repair. You think you are being compassionate, yet compassion without boundaries is possession. The unconscious does not distinguish between your pain and another's. When you let the world in without limit, you become a vessel for all of humanity's anguish. And the ego, the small flame of your individuality, can be extinguished in that storm. I have often observed in dreams how the soul warns of this peril. A man would dream of walking into a vast cathedral filled with weeping figures, each crying for his attention. And as he knelt to comfort one, another would grasp his arm, and another would seize his cloak until he was dragged into the crowd, torn apart by their need. He awoke, drenched in sweat, his heart racing. This was no mere fantasy. This was the image-making power of the unconscious, dramatizing the truth, that too much openness, too much identification with collective suffering robs a man of his axis. He becomes like a candle in a hurricane. Such a man cannot individuate, cannot find his path to wholeness, because he is endlessly scattered into fragments of others. There is in each of us what I have called the self, the archetype of wholeness, the organizing principle of the psyche. The self demands that we differentiate ourselves from others, not in coldness, but in clarity. To be whole does not mean to be dissolved into the mass of human feeling. To be whole is to find the center within, the still point around which the opposites revolve. Yet I see many today who collapse this distinction, who think that to be spiritual is to be porous, to take on the pain of the world until they are crucified upon it. But you are not the Christ archetype itself. You are not meant to be nailed to the suffering of humanity. That symbol already lives within you. It speaks to you, but it does not demand that you destroy yourself in its image. To imitate the archetype, literally, is to court madness. Why? Then do some souls feel compelled to absorb every vibration of others? It is because they have not yet confronted the shadow, that dark and unacknowledged aspect of our being contains rage, selfishness, cruelty, and all the instincts you have disowned. If you cannot admit to your own capacity for coldness, then you will compensate by trying to be endlessly warm. If you cannot bear the thought of your aggression, you will dissolve into excessive gentleness. The empath who feels everything is often one who has repressed their own sharp edges, and so the psyche overcompensates, leaving them defenseless before the tidal wave of the collective unconscious. They become open wounds, bleeding at the touch of every soul that passes near them. But individuation requires the opposite movement. It requires that you integrate your shadow, that you own the wolf and the serpent within, so that you may stand firm against the tide of collective energy. Without this, you cannot hold your boundaries. Without this, your identity fractures and you mistake the sorrows of others for your own. This is why so many empaths are confused about who they truly are. Their moods shift like weather because they do not know which storm is theirs and which belongs to another. And in this confusion, the self is obscured. You cannot see the mandala when the mirror is clouded with every reflection but your own. I recall a patient, a woman who came to me insisting she could feel the emotions of everyone around her. In the tram, she wept when she sensed despair from a stranger. In the market, she grew anxious because the man beside her carried hidden anger. She believed this was a gift, but she was exhausted, ill, and she no longer knew where her soul began. Her dreams told a different story. Night after night, she saw herself as a vessel of clay that cracked and leaked as water was poured endlessly into it. One night, the vessel shattered entirely. This was her unconscious telling her the truth. Her identity was being shattered by the flood of feelings she allowed to pour through her. Only when she dared to face her own shadow, to admit her resentment toward those who demanded her endless care, did she begin to repair her vessel. She learned to feel without dissolving, to discern without absorbing, and so she began to individuate. The danger is ancient. In myth, we see it clearly. Consider the figure of the wounded healer. Chiron, his wound allowed him to heal others, but he could not heal himself. And so his life was marked by endless suffering. To be a healer, to be one who feels deeply, is not inherently a curse. But without wisdom, it becomes one. The shaman of old knew this. They traveled into the underworld, but always returned. They did not remain forever open to the cries of the dead. For that way lay madness. They knew the necessity of ritual, of containment, of the circle that defines what enters and what remains outside. Modern man has forgotten this sacred wisdom, and so he exposes himself to every vibration of the collective without protection, without boundary, without center. And I warn you, the collective unconscious is not benign. It holds not only the treasures of humanity's myths and symbols, but also its horrors, its terrors, its unredeemed shadows. When you feel everything, you do not only absorb the beauty of love and compassion, you also drink in hatred, envy, despair, and violence. These enter into you like spirits, and if you are not prepared, they possess you. This is why many who claim sensitivity fall into depression, why they feel drained, why they are haunted by moods they cannot explain. They are possessed by what is not theirs, because they mistook indiscriminate openness for spiritual grace. But the psyche demands discrimination. Without it, you are lost. Therefore I say to you, feeling is sacred, but it is not supreme. It must be balanced by thought, by discernment, by the axis of the self that holds you steady. To be human is not to feel everything, it is to bear the burden of choosing what you will carry and what you will lay down. If you try to carry the whole world, you will be crushed. Even Christ needed Simon of Cyrene to help him bear the cross. Do not imagine you can feel everything and survive unbroken. To do so is to confuse compassion with martyrdom. True compassion does not annihilate the self, it strengthens it, so that it may act wisely and truly. As I look upon you, I know that many of you here have suffered from this very affliction. You have felt too much, and you have thought this was virtue. But I ask you, what good is your virtue if it destroys your soul? What good is your sensitivity if it leaves you hollow, broken, fragmented? The self calls you not to dissolution, but to integration, to stand in the wholeness of being. You must learn to close the gates of indiscriminate feeling and open instead the inner eye that sees through symbol and dream. For the unconscious speaks in images, not in floods of emotion. If you wish to serve the world, if you wish to love authentically, you must first preserve your vessel. The cracked pot cannot hold the living water. Guard your soul, not out of selfishness, but out of reverence for the self that seeks to incarnate through you. And so I warn you, as I have always warned, to feel everything can shatter your identity, but to feel with discernment, to integrate shadow and light, to balance compassion with boundary. This leads to individuation, to the fullness of the self, to the life that is not drowned in the collective sea but stands upon the shore, able to gaze into its depths without being consumed. There is something profoundly seductive about the notion of feeling everything. To some, it appears as if such sensitivity is proof of their higher calling, a badge of spiritual superiority. They imagine that the wider their heart opens, the closer they come to divinity. Yet, the psyche does not tolerate extremes without demanding a price. What is divine in quality can become demonic in quantity. A gift, when carried to excess, becomes its opposite. If you feel everything without discernment, you do not ascend, you collapse. You do not embody the divine archetype. You fall prey to possession. This is the law of opposites within the psyche, and it spares no one. Consider the archetype of the mother. She is nurturing, enveloping, the source of comfort. But when inflated, she smothers, she devours. She becomes a terrible mother who consumes the very children she wishes to protect. In the same way, the archetype of the empath, the one who feels and connects, when inflated, becomes the devoured self, swallowed by the collective's endless hunger. This is why myths warn us with such imagery. They show us that what begins as love can end as annihilation. In ancient tales, the hero who cannot set boundaries with the gods or the spirits is torn to pieces, scattered across the earth. It is a symbol of the fragmented psyche, destroyed by what it could not contain. If you open yourself to every vibration without discernment, you invite archetypal forces that are larger than you into your fragile ego. These powers are not evil, but they are immense, and the ego cannot withstand them without preparation. This is why rituals of initiation exist. The tribal shaman did not simply wander into the spirit world unguarded. He prepared with fasting, with symbolic death and rebirth, so that his ego was tempered, able to withstand the flood of archetypal energies. Today, however, the modern empath believes sensitivity alone is the path, without discipline, without shadow work, without ritual containment. And so they become overwhelmed, flooded, shattered, and in their confusion, they believe they are cursed, when in truth, they are uninitiated. Feeling everything is not the same as loving wisely. Love is not indiscriminate. True love, archetypally, requires eros, which chooses, which binds itself to the particular. Aphrodite does not scatter her attention on all. Without limit, she directs her passion. And Christ himself, the archetype of sacrificial love, did not heal all at once. He chose moments. He spoke to individuals. He set the rhythm of his acts. Even the highest archetypes model discernment. Only inflation convinces the modern soul that to feel everything without limit is love. Inflation is the whisper of the unconscious that tempts you to play God, to take upon yourself what belongs only to the totality. And I must warn you again, the psyche punishes inflation with collapse. To feel everything indiscriminately is not godlike, it is hubris. And hubris leads to downfall. A dream will often reveal this hidden inflation. One of my patients, overwhelmed by her openness, dreamed she was standing at the edge of an ocean, determined to drink it dry. She drank until she drowned. Her unconscious dramatized her inflation with cruel precision. The ocean is the symbol of the collective, unconscious, limitless, unfathomable. To think you can absorb it is folly. You will drown in it. The proper attitude is not to drink the ocean, but to take from it what your vessel can hold, and then return again and again, in rhythm, always respecting the boundary. Otherwise, the ocean does what it always does. It swallows the unprepared whole. The unconscious does not spare those who ignore boundaries. If you are porous, if you refuse to contain yourself, it will send you nightmares, breakdowns, psychosomatic illness. The body will revolt when the psyche is neglected. Many who feel everything suffer strange illnesses, mysterious fatigue, migraines, autoimmune storms. Their bodies bear the weight of what their psyches cannot metabolize. They call it sensitivity, but it is often unconscious identification with the collective shadow. They are carrying what does not belong to them. The psyche uses the body as its final messenger when the ego will not listen. It says, stop absorbing, stop drowning, stop pretending you are limitless, return to the self. The self, the archetype of wholeness, does not demand that you shatter yourself for others. It calls you to integration. It calls you to bear your own destiny, not the destinies of all. If you are to love authentically, you must first individuate. And individuation is not possible when you are perpetually dissolved in the moods of others. How can you listen to the voice of your soul if it is drowned out by the cries of the world? You cannot serve the world until you know who you are. Otherwise, you serve not from love, but from compulsion, from an unconscious wound that drives you to rescue in order to avoid facing your own shadow. This is the brutal truth. Many who feel everything are unconsciously fleeing from themselves. They seek refuge in the pain of others, so they do not have to face their own darkness. It is easier to weep with another than to enter your own abyss. But the self will not allow this evasion forever. It will send you into isolation. It will cut you off. It will strip you bare until you have no choice but to face your own demons. Individuation demands that you descend into your own shadow first, not drown in the shadows of others. If you ignore this, if you continue to absorb the world without limit, your identity fractures, your soul scatters, and you are left with nothing but fragments of borrowed pain. We must not forget that feeling is not the only function of the psyche. There is also thinking, sensing, intuiting. When feeling inflates, when it dominates, it tyrannizes the whole person. The one who feels everything loses the capacity to think clearly, to intuit wisely, to sense reality as it is. They become lost in waves of emotion, unable to distinguish inner from outer, archetype from neighbor, soul from stranger. In this condition, life becomes a blur, a haze of moods, a storm without compass. And the danger is great, for in this state, one is vulnerable to projection. You may think you are feeling another's sorrow, but in truth, you are projecting your own unacknowledged despair onto them. You may think you are empathizing with another's rage, but it is your own shadow's fury seeking an outlet. Without discrimination, you cannot tell the difference. And so you live in confusion, possessed by forces you cannot name. The work of individuation is to differentiate, to say, this belongs to me, this does not, this is my shadow, that is theirs. This is my archetypal calling, that is mere collective noise. Only then can you stand whole. Without this, you remain a fragment, tossed by every wave of feeling, like Odysseus, without a mast, carried wherever the sea wills. But individuation is the binding of the mast, the knowing of the center, the capacity to sail the waters without losing the shore of yourself. I tell you, beware of those who glorify endless sensitivity. They seduce you with the language of love, but it is false love. True love is rooted in the self, and the self is never shattered. It may descend into chaos, but it rises again, whole, balanced, integrated. Feeling without self is sentimentality, and sentimentality is dangerous because it masks unconscious compulsion. It appears as love, but it devours. It is a counterfeit, and the unconscious punishes counterfeits with disintegration. There is a story from a patient whose dreams often spoke with mythic force. She dreamed she was a harp with many strings, and each person she met plucked them until the music was unbearable. She begged them to stop, but they would not. Then a voice spoke from the darkness. Cut the strings that are not yours. She awoke trembling. This was her soul's instruction. She could not remain a harp for every passing hand. She had to choose her own strings, her own melody, or be shattered by the cacophony. This is the wisdom the unconscious always seeks to give: discernment, boundary, center. Feeling everything is not individuation. It is possession by the collective unconscious. It is a regression into the primal state where the infant knows no boundary between self and mother, between self and world. To grow, to individuate, is to establish that boundary. Not to reject the world, but to meet it as a differentiated soul. The infant must separate to become a person. The empath, who refuses to separate, remains an infant, endlessly overwhelmed, endlessly dependent, endlessly fragmented. This is not wholeness. This is arrested development. Wholeness requires that you bear the burden of separation that you endure the loneliness of being a self-distinct from the world, so that true relationship becomes possible. Without that, you are not in relationship, you are in fusion. And fusion is the death of identity. So I say again, beware. To feel everything can shatter your identity. It may seem noble, but it is perilous. The path of individuation demands balance. It demands that you integrate shadow, that you strengthen ego, that you open to the self in measured rhythm. Without this, your soul will drown in the sea of collective emotion, and you will never know who you are. And if you do not know who you are, how can you serve? How can you love? How can you live? You cannot. You will be nothing but a mirror reflecting the moods of others, never a flame burning with your own light. When we speak of identity, we are speaking of a fragile construction that emerges in the tension between the conscious and the unconscious. Your ego is like a vessel sailing upon a vast sea, and though it appears solid, it is in truth a thin shell held together by your will to endure. The unconscious is always pressing upon it, with dreams, with moods, with fantasies that arise unbidden. If you then add to this the burden of feeling everything from those around you, you double the pressure. It is as if the sea itself rises in waves and pours over the sides, threatening to swamp the vessel entirely. This is why so many who feel excessively soon find themselves in states of confusion, dissociation, or even psychosis. Their fragile ego cannot hold against the tide. The unconscious seizes the moment to break through, and identity is shattered like glass beneath a hammer. You may think that you are noble for carrying such feeling, but the psyche cares nothing for your moral judgments. It demands balance. When the vessel is overloaded, it sinks. Whether your intentions were good or not, I have watched this too many times to count. Patients who came with the belief that their openness was a blessing found themselves undone by it. They became prey to hysteria, to obsession, to endless identification with others, until they no longer knew who they were. And when I asked them to speak of their own soul, they had nothing to say. Their speech was only echoes of others. They were like mirrors, with no face behind the reflection. In the symbolic language of the unconscious, this danger appears often as flood or invasion. A dreamer may find himself in a house with doors flung open, and strangers wander in and out, leaving chores behind. Another may see himself standing on a shore as a tidal wave approaches. These are not trivial dreams. They are warnings from the self that identity is under siege, that the ego has failed to establish boundaries. If these warnings go unheeded, the consequences become more severe. Depression descend, because the soul cannot carry the borrowed sorrows of 1,000 others. Anxiety erupts, because the psyche is invaded by too many foreign emotions. The cure is not to open further, but to close, to discriminate, to return to the center where the self can hold the opposites together. I once treated a young man whose sensitivity was so extreme that he avoided crowds entirely. He said that walking through the streets felt like being whipped by invisible forces. He could sense anger, grief, desire in every passerby, and he was terrified of drowning in them. His dreams revealed a deeper truth. Night after night, he dreamed of standing before a mirror, that reflected not his own face, but the faces of strangers. He no longer knew who he was. The mirror, of course, is a symbol of identity, of the ego's attempt to see itself. But when that mirror is filled with others, the ego has lost its ground. Only when we begin the slow work of shadow integration, teaching him to recognize his own repressed feelings, his own unacknowledged desires, did he begin to reclaim his reflection. For it is always so. If you cannot face your own depths, you will drown in the depths of others. The archetypes within us demand expression, and if we repress them, they will find their way into projection. If you deny your inner rage, you will become exquisitely sensitive to the anger of others. If you deny your inner grief, you will feel the sorrow of strangers as if it were your own. This is why indiscriminate feeling is so dangerous. It is not pure perception. It is often projection in disguise. You are not feeling the world as it is. You are feeling your shadow reflected in it. To disentangle these threads requires ruthless honesty. You must ask, is this truly theirs, or is it mine? Am I feeling compassion, or am I merely encountering my own disowned pain in another form? Without such questioning, the empath becomes lost in illusions, thinking themselves saintly when they are merely unintegrated. The myth of Narcissus warns us here as well. Narcissus gazed into the water and believed he loved another, when in truth he was trapped by his own reflection. In the same way, the empaths may believe they are feeling another, when in fact they are drowning in their own unconscious projected outward. The tragedy of Narcissus is that he could not differentiate image from reality, self from other, and so he perished. The tragedy of the unbounded empath is similar. They cannot tell where they end and the other begins, and so they dissolve into nothingness, their identity lost in endless reflection. Individuation demands the opposite. It demands that you see clearly, that you withdraw projections, that you recognize the archetypal play of your own psyche before you mistake it for the soul of another. But this work is not easy. To withdraw projection, to set boundaries, feels cruel at first. Many will accuse you of coldness. They will say, you have closed your heart, but a heart that is open without limit is not a heart, it is a wound. To become whole, you must learn the sacred art of saying no. You must learn to distinguish the demands of the collective from the call of the self, for the self does not call you to dissolve into every sorrow. It calls you to bear the particular burden of your own destiny. The self has given you an inner image, a task, a pattern that only you can embody. If you abandon it to feel everything indiscriminately, you betray the self. You betray your wholeness. And no amount of borrowed pain can substitute for the fulfillment of your own calling. Dreams often show the path of individuation through symbols of containment. A patient may dream of building walls around a garden, or of crafting a vessel that holds water without leaking. These images arise when the psyche knows that identity is threatened. The unconscious is trying to teach the ego, contain, hold, discriminate. Without containment, life leaks away. Without boundaries, the garden withers under the trampling of strangers. The vessel shatters, the self withdraws, the soul falls ill. And yet, when these boundaries are established, something miraculous happens. The garden blooms, the vessel holds, the self emerges, radiant, because it has a form through which to incarnate. You cannot be whole without boundaries. To feel everything is to destroy the form, and without form, spirit has nowhere to dwell. You must also understand that archetypes are not gentle, they are forces of nature. To feel everything is to open yourself to archetypal invasion. Imagine the archetype of war entering your unprotected psyche, or the archetype of despair. These are not small feelings, they are tidal forces, collective, immense. They can seize you, possess you, drive you into madness. In the ancient world, possession was understood as the gods seizing a mortal. Today, we call it psychosis, hysteria, obsession. But the phenomenon is the same when you feel everything without boundary. You invite the gods into your house without discernment. Some may bring wisdom, but others will bring ruin. The psyche is a temple, not a market. You must guard its doors. It is not that you should cease to feel. Feeling is sacred. It is one of the 4 pillars of the psyche. But feeling must be integrated, balanced by thought, grounded by sensation, illuminated by intuition. Only then does it serve individuation. To feel without balance is to be swept away. To feel with balance is to be guided by the self. The difference is vast. One path leads to fragmentation, the other leads to wholeness. The choice is yours, though the unconscious will always push you toward balance eventually, whether gently or through crisis. I have seen those who ignored this warning brought to the edge of madness. One woman came to me after years of living as an open vessel. She believed she was channeling the feelings of humanity, that she was a prophet of collective sorrow, but her life was in ruins. She could not work, she could not love. She was consumed by despair that was not hers. Her dreams were apocalyptic, filled with floods, with collapsing buildings, with skies falling into chaos. These were not messages for the world, they were her psyche's desperate cry for boundaries. Only when she accepted that she was not called to feel everything, that she had mistaken her inflation for a divine calling, could she begin to heal. Slowly, painstakingly, she learned to close her doors, to listen for her own soul, and as she did, the apocalyptic dreams subsided. The self began to guide her. Again, this is always the pattern. When you stop drowning in the collective, the individual self can emerge. So I say to you, beware of the seduction of endless sensitivity. It promises greatness, but it delivers ruin. It masquerades as love, but it devours identity. The true path is narrower, more disciplined, more mysterious. It requires you to face your shadow, to integrate your darkness, to say no. When the collective demands your dissolution, only then can you truly love. Only then can you feel with authenticity. Only then can you serve without being shattered. This is the paradox of individuation. You must separate to unite. You must contain to overflow. You must guard your soul to offer it freely. Without this paradox, you remain trapped in illusion. And so I return to my warning. To feel everything can shatter your identity, but to feel wisely, to feel with the self as your guide, is to become whole. You are not called to dissolve into the ocean. You are called to build a vessel that can sail it. You are not called to absorb the cries of all humanity. You are called to listen for the voice of your own soul. And in listening to that voice, you will discover that you serve the whole far more authentically than if you had drowned in it. For the self, when incarnated, radiates love and meaning far beyond what any porous ego can achieve. It is the axis, the mandala, the light in the darkness. To protect your identity is not selfishness. It is fidelity to the self. Identity is the most delicate of vessels. It takes years of life, of suffering, of conflict, to form the fragile pattern that allows you to say, I. And yet, it can be dissolved in moments if you forget that it must be protected. When you allow yourself to feel everything without limit, you are in truth forgetting that the ego is not infinite. It is finite, and its finitude is its strength. The self is infinite. Yes, but the ego must serve as its container, or else the light of the self burns the vessel to ash. This is why so many mystics, unprepared for the fire, lose themselves in madness when they open indiscriminately to all that pours through. They mistake the flood of archetypal energy for holiness, and yet it destroys them, because they did not have the form to hold it. The path to wholeness is not the annihilation of the self, but its transformation. The ego must become a chalice, shaped, tempered, capable of carrying the wine of the divine without shattering. To feel everything is to pour without measure, and the chalice cracks. To feel wisely, to discern, to limit, is to preserve the form that allows spirit to live within you. It is only through form that the formless can be made manifest. Only through containment can the infinite be embodied. If you dissolve yourself entirely, you become nothing, and nothing cannot serve the world. I have often said that the gods have not disappeared. They have merely become diseases. What was once experienced as Zeus or Aphrodite, as Ares or Dionysus, now erupts in the psyche as neurosis, as obsession, as possession. When you feel everything without boundary, you invite the gods to return in their rawest form. You are seized by moods larger than yourself. You are overwhelmed by passions that consume your life. This is what it means to be possessed. The gods demand worship, and if you do not recognize them as archetypes, they will demand your identity as their sacrifice. To feel everything is to hand them that sacrifice willingly. Though you may not recognize it as such, you will say, I am simply open, simply compassionate. But the truth is that you are offering your fragile ego upon the altar of the collective unconscious. And the gods, indifferent to your intentions, will take it. The way of individuation is different. It is the way of honoring the gods without being devoured by them. It is the way of setting the boundary between ego and self, between self and other, between human and archetype. You honor Ares by recognizing your own aggression, not by drowning in the rage of the collective. You honor Aphrodite by embracing your own desire, not by losing yourself in the endless longings of others. You honor Dionysus by experiencing ecstasy within form, not by surrendering your identity in chaotic dissolution. This is the wisdom the ancients knew, and which modern man has forgotten. They built temples, they made rituals, they contained the gods in symbol. We, by contrast, imagine ourselves strong enough to feel everything directly, without mediation, and we collapse under the weight. The dreams of the sensitive reveal this collapse again and again. One woman dreamed she was a tree with roots spread across the earth, absorbing the sorrow of every grave, every battlefield, every broken heart. She was vast, and yet she was dying. Her leaves withered, her trunk hollowed by too much grief. The unconscious showed her the truth. Her openness to all had hollowed her. The archetype of the tree of life had become the tree of death. To life, she needed to prune, to withdraw her roots, to limit her reach. Only then could her leaves return. This is the paradox. In limiting, we grow. In discriminating, we flourish. In saying no, we preserve the yes of life itself. Some of you here have mistaken your suffering for virtue. You believe that by carrying the sorrows of the world, you are serving it. But let me tell you, the world does not need your martyrdom. It needs your wholeness. It needs you to become who you are. Only then can you give something real. If you shatter your identity, if you dissolve into endless feeling, you vanish. And what good can you offer then? You become another fragment, another lost soul in the collective sea. But if you guard your vessel, if you walk the path of individuation, if you face your shadow and integrate it, then your identity becomes strong. And through it, the self can radiate light into the darkness of the world. That light is worth infinitely more than all the borrowed pain you have carried. I know it is tempting to believe otherwise. I know it feels holy to say, I feel all. But holiness without wholeness is deception. It is sentimentality masquerading as spirituality. True holiness is integration. It is the union of opposites within the self. It is the recognition that love must be boundaried, that compassion must be discriminating, that openness must be tempered by form. Without this, you are not holy. You are lost. The unconscious is ruthless in this respect. It will not spare you because your intentions were good. It demands balance, and if you do not willingly create that balance, it will impose it through breakdown, through illness, through collapse. This is not punishment, it is correction. The psyche insists on wholeness, and it will not allow you to remain inflated forever. The myth of Icarus is a warning here. Icarus, intoxicated by the sun, flew too high, believing himself limitless, but his wings could not withstand such fire, and he fell to his death. In the same way, the empath who feels everything flies too close to the collective sun. Their fragile ego melts, and they plummet. The lesson of Icarus is not to avoid flight altogether, but to fly with measure, to respect the limits of form. To be human is to live between heaven and earth, not to dissolve into either. You must hold the tension of opposites, not abandon yourself to one extreme. To feel everything is to abandon that tension. To feel with measure is to live it. So I call you to courage, for it is not easy to step back, to say no, to face your own shadow, rather than dissolving in the shadows of others. It is easier to drown in collective feeling than to confront your own darkness. But individuation demande courage. It demands that you turn inward, that you face the lion in your dreams, that you wrestle with the serpent, that you descend into the underworld of your own soul. Only then can you rise whole. Only then can you feel authentically. Only then can you serve the world in truth. Anything less is illusion, and illusion will shatter you. In the end, you must ask yourself, do you wish to be dissolved, or do you wish to be whole? Do you wish to vanish into the sea of collective emotion, or do you wish to stand as an individual soul, radiating light? The choice is yours, but the unconscious will not allow you to evade it forever. It will call you again and again, through dreams, through crises, through breakdowns, until you choose wholeness. And when you do, when you set boundaries, when you integrate your shadow, when you guard your vessel, you will discover something astonishing. You will discover that in becoming whole, you serve the whole far more profoundly than you ever did by drowning in it. For the self, when incarnated, is the axis of the world. One whole soul does more for humanity than 1,000 shattered empaths. So hear my warning and let it echo in your heart. Carl Jung warned you, feeling everything can shatter your identity. Do not be seduced by the illusion of boundless compassion. Do not sacrifice your soul on the altar of indiscriminate feeling. Guard your vessel, contain your spirit, face your shadow, walk the path of individuation. Only then will you discover the wholeness for which you were born. Only then will you shine with the light that is truly yours. And that light, when it burns, is more than enough to illuminate the darkness of the world.